often think about wealth in terms of what the end is, but the real power of wealth is what it can do for people. It gives you choice, it gives you freedom, it gives you agency. Now let's think about what wealth is in terms of numbers. The top 10% of households have over 75% of the nation's wealth. The bottom 50% of households have about 1% of the nation's wealth. So however unequal we are in terms of wealth, race becomes a bigger predictor of somebody's wealth position than class itself. The typical black household has about 10 cents on the dollar the typical white household, and that's including home equity. We know that if you are a head of household and you're black and you graduated from college, your family's wealth position is lower than that of a white family where the head dropped out of high school. So this feeds into the narrative of, can we simply work hard, study hard, and address inequality?
There's an amazing ladder in America for anyone to climb, right? Anyone can climb it.
The answer is no. When we start getting into these narratives of a post-racial society, we're not there. Now, we can come up with comprehensive programs that include everybody, but we need to do it differently this way so that we make sure nobody is left behind, regardless of your race, gender, disability status, etc.
Well, I know after that, nobody really wants to hear from me, but I give him a little chance to get his bearings. So I'm Daniela Levine-Cava. I'm the proud founder, along with a couple of others, of this great organization today, Catalyst Miami. So I'm kind of like the grandma in the room. And also, I do need to acknowledge, this is proper protocol, that my sister on the commission, Eileen Higgins, Commissioner District 5, is with us here today. A wonderful addition to our county commission. Thank you so much, Eileen. And we have been properly sunshine noticed so that we can be here together and even talk about things. Can you imagine? All right. There is power in conversation. So I wanted to start with a little personal reflection and then get to our wonderful speaker. You know, we all get ideas from each other. We are not alone in the struggle, in the journey. And so Catalyst Miami came out of some inspiration someplace back then, and the Prosperity Campaign came out of attendance at some conference where I saw the benefit of linking supports for families into one, trying to reduce the runaround that poor people have, because it is a full-time job to be poor in this country. So that was the Prosperity Campaign. And the wealth initiatives that are being showcased in today's program came out of a meeting that I had with Ted Howard, the Community Wealth Initiative out of University of Maryland, College Park, and an initiative that he and Gar Alperitz put together around the things that would really not just build income, but build wealth. And so it is really incredible to me that, having learned about those things back in the day at Catalyst Miami, then the Human Services Coalition, that Catalyst has diligently pursued these opportunities. And now here we are on the threshold of launching several of these really powerful initiatives. So I want to just tell you a little bit about the history of that. You know, back when I was on the outside of county government, I was always down at the county commission petitioning for these sorts of things. Now that I'm on the inside, I can only get things done when those of you on the outside partner to push the agenda, to demand action, to make sure that the commissioners know that people are watching and that these things matter. That is how we get things done, inside and outside. So, you know, I learned when I got on the county commission that, unfortunately, a lot of times we have to just step back and do a study to justify the things we already know. So we did that. We commissioned a study, FIU Metropolitan Center, partnering with Citi, that funded it, put together a list of the kinds of powerful initiatives that would lift wealth, and they looked at, for example, 5 asset building strategies: community land trusts, social enterprise accelerators, community benefit agreements, children's savings accounts, and worker cooperatives. The resulting study really help to bring the community back around to talk about these hard issues, because, you know, people, it's like if it's the headline, it's, you know, we pay attention for a week or two at most. So this was a really solid piece of research, which we're going to refine and amplify from the good work that's going to be launched here in February, I understand. But it was really an important rallying cry at the time. And of course, you know, these things work in parallel. I don't claim ownership for these things having moved forward at Catalyst, because Catalyst has been under the able leadership of my wonderful successor, Gretchen Biesing. Let's give it up for Gretchen. Woo! And the fabulous board of directors that have advanced the vision. And by the way, we have some founders in the room today. Let's just take a little look around. We've got Paul Hunt and Santiago Leon. They are two of the organization's founders. We have any other founders here? No, but we have some board members. If you would stand, current and past board members to be acknowledged, please. All right, okay. All right, you guys are, you know, our inspiration. So, so I have been championing these strategies, but I am so incredibly proud of the work of Catalyst Miami at really moving the needle on a couple of these. And children's savings accounts has been approved by the school board and is going forward in the city of Miami. That is going to be an amazing development. And you can count on me as a partner. I'm already, you know, bothering Gretchen, like, let's start down south. I know I have to wait till next year, but I'm ready. Community land trusts we brought to Miami-Dade County, and with the able assistance of my wonderful team, and if my team could just stand to be recognized. Come on, guys and gals. We got Jason. we actually have signed off on some deals for community land trusts. I mean, we're getting started. And we have our very own accelerator in South Dade, Accelerate South Dade, and FIU has some major accelerators and others. And then community benefits. I just came from the panel with 2 CRAs that have included community benefits in their work. Very, very proud of the work that we did to redo the legislation on the community redevelopment agencies and make sure that community benefits were part of it. And I have the real pleasure and honor today to be the one to announce the next greatest initiative, which is the exploration and launching of worker cooperatives in Miami, thanks to JP Morgan Chase. Do we have representative from JP Morgan Chase in the room? She's in the, well, wherever you are, is it Maria? Shakiria Brown, newest member of the JP Morgan Chase team. We salute you, Shakiria, and the entire team for your vision and your dedication. Well, you know, the figures we just heard on this little video clip are really harrowing. And I was going to just give you some local ones just to put it in context. But I know we're going to be doing a deep dive as to the Miami situation in a little bit today, but more so in February. But just to share, 61% of our Miami-Dade population struggles to get by every day. They're either below poverty, or they are asset limited, income constrained, and employed, meaning that they're working hard, they're living above the federal poverty level, but they still can't make ends meet. And a recent study by Prosperity Now, a national organization, ranks Miami as 62 out of 64 large cities, and our income divide continues to grow. We're going in the wrong direction post-recession. The wealthy have consolidated their wealth, and the rest are going down. So just some specific examples of income here. Our median income is 42 almost thousand, but for non-Hispanic whites, that's 65,000. That's quite a significant gap. And for black non-Hispanics, that is about half at 32,000. By the way, this is reflected in wage rates as well. So, you know, across the professions, doing the same work, people are paid at that kind of huge discrepancy, depending upon their race and ethnicity. Well, one of the great things about the worker cooperative is that it builds wealth and it creates greater equality. It's more stable. People are less likely to lose their jobs, and they're able to also preserve better family life balance with more vacation, time off, that sort of a thing. So and they're also more productive. So worker cooperatives are really something that we hope will grow in importance. I'm, again, pushing to have South Dade be at the forefront. And I want to credit Santiago Leon with first informing me about worker cooperatives and how successful they were in Italy. We've been talking about that for about 20 years, right, Sandy? Only 20. Well, you know, you got to be patient. We take a long-term view. But when I mean, a lot of the things we're talking about here today, we've been talking about for 20 years or more. So, hey. But you know what? The tide is turning, right? When I look out at all of you and this great day, the wonderful conference that Catalyst put together, and the partners, I feel really hopeful. I feel really confident that the tide is turning. And we're going to hear some more great ideas today, and we're going to take them to the bank. So with that, let me tell you just a little bit about this wonderful man. So Dr. Derek Hamilton is currently the director of a doctoral program in public and urban policy. He was jointly appointed as professor of economics and urban policy at the Milano School of International Affairs, management and urban policy, Department of Economics at the New School for Social Research, and he's co-associate director of the Cook Center on Social Equity. He's a fellow at the Roosevelt Institute, a national advisory committee member of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation policy group to build a culture of health, and a faculty research fellow at the Bernard Schwartz Center for Economic Policy Analysis. I don't know how, really. I'm sorry. What are you eating? I don't get it. But starting in 2019, he will be the executive director of the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity at Ohio State University. Yeah, let's give it up for him. But I just noticed something else that I could not leave out of his bio. And then I will shut up and let Derek come up. He is a stratification economist. Okay, do we need that? Yeah, we do. And his work fuses social science methods to examine causes, consequences, and remedies of racial and ethnic inequality in education, economic, and health outcomes. Okay? I mean, this man, Nobel Prize, let's look into the future. All right. Okay, because he's looking at the intersection of identity, racism, colorism, and socioeconomic outcomes. Okay, these are the things that people have wanted to hide, right? We've been hiding behind the reality of these divides. And with no further ado, here is Dr. Hamilton to tell us what we can do about it. Thank you.
Daniela, you're great for my self-esteem. But in all seriousness, the work that Miami Catalyst does, the work that many of you are doing in this room, I can sit in my academy and pontificate all I want about the world's problems and come up with solutions, but I want to win. And in order to win, we certainly need social movements, and we need people to implement big, bold ideas. So I'm committed to collaboration. All right. So I'm going to try to be ambitious in a little bit of time, so I'm going to go kind of fast. I'm going to present a little bit of some work that we've been doing as part of a project called The Color of Wealth, where we've been looking at color of wealth in various cities. And we have not released the Miami report yet, but we will in February. So I'm going to highlight a little bit of that, not a whole lot, a little bit. And then I'm going to get into, I think, what I was brought here to discuss, which is the frame in which we exist of despair, the narratives around that despair, and an alternative frame, an alternative policy frame that we can implement to address that despair. So let me start with the so if I step away from the mic, I will speak very loud. Oh, but I guess we're being filmed. There you go. All right, sorry. All right, so again, this is part of an ongoing project that was largely funded by the Ford Foundation, but there have been other foundations as well that have contributed, as well as some Federal Reserve banks, where we're looking at we're looking at asset and debt in America as we become more plural. What is the asset and debt position of Americans? And we look at various cities. So I'm not telling anybody anything that the racial wealth gap is enormous. And after the last Great Recession, it got even bigger. So we can look at the recession and we can see that the racial wealth gap for whites versus blacks and whites versus Latinos actually grew. So some people have articulated that the recession wiped away communities of color wealth. I don't think that's an accurate narrative because it's not as if these communities ever had wealth. I think it went from dismal to even worse. And then in this study, we did some narratives. So I'm going to give you an example of some flavor where we went in and asked people about their debt position and their asset position. So this study was done in Boston, where we looked at some U.S. slave descendants as well as Caribbean blacks, and we asked them about what they conceived of in terms of their wealth position and how they're able to accumulate wealth. So here's a quote from Natalie, who's a 50-year-old Caribbean-born black woman who's a principal for every practical definition of middle class, except for the most paramount one, wealth. She's middle class. She's highly educated. She has a great professional job, and she makes a pretty good income. So here's her quote. Working class means you don't have substantial savings. Everything is contingent on you going to work. And she goes on to say, we're not well off enough if something were to happen to me, we could survive for no more than 6 months tops. That's dependent on me waking up and going to work and getting paid every other week. There's no investments. There's no business. It's just me getting up every day. People might look at my salary and think I'm doing well, but it's all contingent on me going to work. So her whole financial stability is placed in that job, but it's not just her. She has relatives that depend on her as well. Okay? All right, so I'm going to skip this slide because I kind of talked about it in the video and you saw that already. But here are some lessons learned from the Great Recession. Black and Latino families have little liquid assets. They're virtually penniless when you take away home equity to deal with any type of unintended expense, emergency, etc. Communities of color suffered the most. So the racial wealth gap was extreme before the recession. It got even worse. The group that had the largest absolute loss in their wealth position were Asians. And a lot of that had to do with where they lived. They benefited the most from the housing boom and likewise suffered the most from the housing bust. Okay? But to say that, because prior to the Great Recession, as a group, Asians had, at the median, more wealth than a typical white family. But if you tell that to somebody who might have migrated to America with refugee status, say from Cambodia or Vietnam, they would say, what? So, you know, the problem is we need to disaggregate groups. The problem is also that that asset markets are local, and we know that from the Great Recession. So that's why we did the National Asset Scorecard of Communities of Color. We didn't just look at broadly defined black, white, Asian, and Native Americans are usually ignored altogether. We disaggregated groups by ancestral origin, and we looked at local contexts where the housing prices and products are more similar. So if you're looking at inequality, you want to look at a common frame. Okay? All right, so here's some examples of the results, and you can see Miami is, where's my little pointer? There it is. So there's Miami, and the asterisk means statistical significance relative to the white population. And the beauty of this study is that we can look at not only variation across metropolitan area, we can look within variation by broadly defined ethnic groups as well as specifically defined ethnic groups. So for example, if we want to see if, well, this is the payday lending slide. Let me wait till I get to the wealth slide. But you can see what are payday lending loans. These are short-term loans that are supposed to hold you over to your next payday. But what is the problem with payday lending? High interest. Exorbitant interest costs that are oftentimes debt traps. that leads you to keep paying more and more interest until you ultimately default. Okay? And when do people turn to payday lending? After they have exhausted every other opportunity. So as a last resort funding, people turn to these predatory products. So there's an unfortunate irony that those that need the money the most and have the least have to pay the most in order to get that money to hold them over, especially considering the income and expense volatility that we're experiencing. In Miami, given some of the projections with climate change, this is a locality that should really be concerned about volatility in people's household expenses. All right. We can look at median income, and Daniela already cited some of these statistics. We can see that there's variation between the white group median income and the other communities of color income groups. But what's even more pronounced is if we look at wealth. So we find that the median wealth of a typical white family in Miami is about $107,000. For U.S. slave descendants, about $3,700. For Caribbean-born blacks or Caribbean descendant blacks, about $12,000, $22,000 for Cubans. And then the South American descendants, we find their wealth positions about $1,200. We didn't have enough observations to estimate the Puerto Rican wealth position. We estimate some other outcomes from them. So this is a preview for the big study we're going to release in February, where you're going to see lots more data, and we're going to disaggregate even further. So we're going to bring in some census information and look and see at not only looking at Latino heritage, Black heritage, and country of origin heritage, but those that self-identify as racially Black versus those that don't. Okay. All right. I wanted to highlight this Baltimore thing before I get into my main talk, and I'm probably running too long on time right now. But in Baltimore, we went in and collected data not only by whether you're Black, white. So, by the way, we chose Miami because it's a very plural city. So we chose 5 cities that were geographically representative: LA, Boston, Miami, Detroit, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. And then we also wanted to get variation in ethnic groups. So LA, we have a set of Latino variation. And then Miami, we get a different set of Latino representation. And then we were thinking about that for Black groups as well. And then we also surveyed Tulsa, Oklahoma. Why? Because Tulsa has one of the highest shares of Native populations for a metropolitan area, if not the highest. So we were able to look at tribal origin as well. Okay. All right, so in Baltimore, we added the feature of looking at whether you had a relative or you yourself had been previously incarcerated. So we can get at the intersections of race, incarceration, and wealth, not only for Black families, but for white families as well. So probably not to anybody's surprise, incarceration is associated with low wealth. Race is associated with low wealth. So we find that at the median, Black families that indicated no prior incarceration, $0 wealth position, $150 if they did, negative $150 if they indicated prior incarceration, $125,000 for whites, and then $2,100 for whites that indicated previous incarceration. Here's one interpretation of this slide. Being Black is not good for wealth. Being previously incarcerated is not good for wealth. And the intersections of Black and incarceration, you're really worse off in terms of wealth. So the latter I would push back on. And if we look at the comparison between Black families that were never incarcerated versus those that were, we're looking at a net wealth position difference of about $150. For white families, the absolute difference is well over $100,000, $125,000 versus $2,100. Incarceration for white families hurts them more. Now, it's a lot, I should be careful. We know that white families have a much lower prevalence of incarceration than Black families. But the intersection of incarceration and race, here's something that is sobering. Being Black, the relative loss in your wealth from incarceration is relatively trivial compared to white families. That is indicative of a dominance of race.
right? So the relative loss in your wealth position if you're black and you have incarceration is much smaller than that of a white family. So the intersection of race and incarceration is more dramatic for white families than black families. And what does that mean? What is the takeaway? The takeaway is how dominant race is in determining one's life outcomes in America. All right. These are some examples of the studies we've released, and then here's a preview of the Miami study. Now I'm going to get into the talk. All right. So the private sector and the market alone has never been adequate to deal with reinforcing inequalities and worker vulnerabilities and obstacles to social mobility. Even in times of economic expansion, wealth disparity and inequality in general grows. Over the last 45 years, essentially all the economic gains from America's increasing productivity have gone to the elite and upper middle class, while real worker wages have remained roughly flat. These vulnerabilities are more pronounced for economically marginalized and socially stigmatized groups. Their vulnerabilities disproportionately fall on women, blacks, and other non-whites. Their education, their employment, their earnings are more precarious, and they tend to have more caregiving and financial responsibilities. Progressives often make economic productivity arguments to justify greater equity or an emphasis on equity. Such arguments may be valid, but they're context-specific. I prefer Reverend William Barber's framing that economic justice is a moral imperative. To me, that is enough reason to do it, irrespective of any productivity gains that one could draw. Basically, we need a societal shift from public policy that prioritizes tax cuts for the rich and economic austerity for everyone else, and policies that use tax incentives and deregulation to cajole or bribe an already record profit-earning private sector to provide more jobs and rebuild our nation's crumbling infrastructure. I guess a recent example is the Amazon bidding that took place in New York City and Virginia just won. Such an approach entrenches our plutocracy and leaves worker vulnerability to the whimsical nature of trickle-down economics, as well as the instability of contingent work. Instead, we need to prioritize economic rights, like a federal job guarantee, and like a baby bonds, or more accurately, a baby trust program that promotes economic inclusion, social equity, and fairness for everyone as public options to predatory finance, predatory firms, and exclusions from the benefits of inherited affluence. And I know we're thinking about local policies, so I'm framing a lot of my talk in terms of federal policies, which ultimately we need to get to as a society, but a lot of these can be implemented at a local level as well, and I can talk about it at some point. All right. The concept of economic rights is not new, nor is it radical. In 1944, President Roosevelt introduced the idea of an economic Bill of Rights. Roosevelt called for, quote, physical security, economic security, social security, and moral security. And in his first article of what would be considered the Second American Bill of Rights, he called for guaranteed employment. Unfortunately, since the Nixon administration, the political sentiment regarding social mobility has radically shifted away from government mandates to employment security, to a neoliberal approach in which the market is presumed to be the solution for all our problems, economic or otherwise. As a result, the onus of social mobility has shifted onto the individual. The pervasive narrative implicit in unfettered markets is that even if your lot in life is subpar, with perseverance and hard work and the virtues of the free market, you can turn your proverbial rags into riches. Markets, whether they're product markets, labor markets, or financial markets, they're presumed to be natural, transparent, efficient, self-regulating, and inevitable. The most astute, the most valued, the hardest workers, they're believed to prosper and endure, while on the flip side,
It is the virtues of the markets that are likewise supposed to sanction those that are not astute, that are less motivated, and that are simply lazy. In other words, these are the deserving poor. And they're stigmatized by the political fodder of an anti-blackness, whether they are actually black or not. I've been commonly using a term, I think we niggerize the poor. In other words, whether you're black or white, we put pejorative narratives on your behavior as the explanation for your position. So this group is supposed to receive their just rewards and simply fade away or find something else to do over time. So what is glaringly missing from that narrative is the role of power and capital, and how power and capital can be used to alter the rules and structure of transactions and markets themselves so as to favor those with power and capital. Power and capital are self-reinforcing, and without government intervention, they generate an iterative cycle of stratification and inequality. Without capital, inequality becomes locked in. We use words like choice and freedom to describe the benefits of the market, but it is literally wealth that gives you choice, freedom, and optionality. Wealth is the paramount indicator of economic well-being and social mobility. Basically, it is wealth that begets more wealth. That's how we get wealth. It provides financial agency and economic security to take risk, and it also shields against loss. And when it comes to economic security, kind of as I mentioned in the video, wealth is both the beginning and the end. I'm going to skip some of the data because we talked about it. But I can say that the disparity that was presented in the video has endured. The black share of the nation's wealth is only proportionately equivalent to what it was at the end of the U.S. Civil War. The racial wealth gap is an inheritance that began with chattel slavery, when blacks were literally the capital of a plantation-owning white plantation-owning class. The intergenerational racial wealth gap was structurally created via discrimination and exclusionary policy that has virtually nothing to do with individual or racialized choices. The source of inequality is structural, it's not behavioral. Intra-family transfers provide some young adults with capital to purchase a wealth-generating asset like a home, like a new business, like a debt-free college education, and those assets can appreciate over a lifetime. Access to this is not based on merit. It's seed capital at a key point in your life to allow you to get into those vehicles of upward mobility. My profession, economics, and I'm glad it was pointed out that I'm a stratification economist. That's intentional. I'm part of an emerging group that is looking at gender, race, and other forms of stratification, immigration, etc., front and center, not as a periphery. And we've been dissatisfied with the economic approach of overemphasizing individual optimization as the explanation of inequality. So we're bringing in ideas from other disciplines and ironically looking at the strategic behavior of discrimination as the mechanisms to explain inequality. So my profession has fallen short in its understanding of the role of group inequality, such as race, gender, and their intersections as they relate to material and psychological well-being. Ultimately, orthodox explanations of persistent racial discrimination typically reduce to some collective group-based human capital or cultural ineptitude or dysfunction on the part of blacks, Latinx, or other subaltern group members. In contrast, stratification economics and critical race theory, they recognize that there are tangible material and psychological benefits associated with white privilege and the property rights in whiteness. High-achieving black Americans, as measured by education, still exhibit large economic and health disparities relative to their white peers. The fact that a black family where the head graduated from college has less wealth than a white family where the head dropped out of high school is indicative of a property right in whiteness. The fact that a black expectant mother with a college degree is more likely to have an infant death than a white expectant mother who dropped out of high school, and the fact that a black man with a college degree is 3 times more likely to die from stroke than a white man who dropped out of high school are also indicative in the property rights and whiteness. In essence, education is not the magic antidote for the enormous inherited disparities that have resulted from laws, policies, and economic arrangements. That doesn't diminish the value of education. There's clear intrinsic value to education, along with a public responsibility to expose everyone with a high-quality education that teaches them to synthesize and fuse information into big ideas with encouraging teachers trained to deliver that curriculum from grade school all the way through college. But it is a myth that black people don't value education, but it is also problematic that society overemphasizes the economic returns to education as the panacea to address socially established structural barriers, particularly as it relates to racial disparity. We overstate the functional role of education to the detriment of understanding the functional role of wealth. So Michael Linder and I, in our Roosevelt Institute brief, The Hidden Rules of Race Are Embedded in the New Tax Code, we detailed how that recently passed Tax Cut and Jobs Act is a partisan game changer that will accelerate racial economic disparity in at least 4 ways. First, the benefits accrue disproportionately to high-income households who are overwhelmingly white and underwhelmingly black. Second, the tax cuts privilege existing wealth holders rather than providing avenues to create new wealth. And we know that blacks have been generationally denied the ability to access and pass down wealth. There's scant evidence that the presumed promise of trickle-down job creation from increased firm investment. Corporations are already using the windfall tax savings to repurchase shares of their own stock, and we see some of them are even laying off people. These stock buybacks benefit existing shareholders. The top 20% of Americans own 92% of all shareholder wealth. This is obviously not a group that is very inclusive of black or Latinx populations. Third, by limiting the state and local tax deductions, the law will push states and localities to rely more heavily on fees and fines as sources of revenue, and we know that this disproportionately increases the debt and strips the wealth of black communities. Not only are fees and fines more regressive sources of income, but they also extend the reach of a broken criminal justice system that causes enormous economic and civic damage within communities of color. And of course, when confronted with an expensive legal system, as was mentioned, these families have very little wealth to deal with that experience. Finally, the enormous revenue loss to the tune of $2 trillion over the next decade, coupled with the limitations on the state and local tax deductions, that will undermine the public sector. And we know that that proposes a particular burden on black and brown people, and it will widen disparities in these communities. In sum, the Tax Cut and so-called Jobs Act favors the rich and powerful few and will specifically prey upon black and brown communities. So rather than a tax law that will result in 13 million more people without health insurance, the federal government should be looking to expand the economic right of Medicare for all. Rather than imposing pressure on state and localities to rely on fines and fees to balance local budgets, the federal government should be looking to end mass incarceration of nonviolent offenders and hold police criminally and civilly responsible for abusive police practice. And rather than cajoling and bribing an already record profit-earning private sector with tax incentives under the fickle aspiration of trickle-down job creation, the federal government should be looking to initiate the economic right to a guaranteed federal job that directly provides the economic security of a living wage and worker amenities, including workers from stigmatized groups, investments in our public and physical and human infrastructure, and increasing the bargaining power for all workers by removing the threat of unemployment. So not only will a federal job guarantee benefit direct recipients, by removing that threat of unemployment, perhaps the waitress that's being harassed at work, sexually harassed, to feed her family, she'll have greater bargaining power to push back against that harassment. It empowers all workers. And to address our massive and growing wealth disparity, William Darity and I have advocated for baby bonds, basically a substantial child trust account. Baby bonds are designed to provide an opportunity to purchase an appreciating asset for all newborns. It is a birthright to capital. It allows people to begin a lifetime when they become an adult to build assets and economic security independent of the financial position and the family in which they're born. In some ways, it's a counterintuitive policy because it's intended to divorce children from their families, to give them a nest egg so that they can start a life of building economic security. And, you know, we're thinking about local policies. We could certainly conceive of a baby bond type program to be implemented locally in Miami. And for Miami, we don't even have to we can start it at high school. But can we empower people with assets when they're a young adult to be earmarked towards that economic security of an asset that will appreciate over their lifetime? So the accounts would be held in public trust to be used as a foundation to an economically secure life. The accounts could be accessed when the child becomes an adult, and again, used to get the benefit of a new business, a seed capital for a home, or a debt-free college education. The program would complement the economic right of old age pension and provide a more comprehensive Social Security program designed to give us capital finance from cradle all the way to grave. We have stuff for the twilight of our life, but we have nothing beyond subsistence programs when Americans are just starting to build a life of economic security. I'm worried about time, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, and I'm just going to say the extent of our dramatic inequality is at least as much a problem of politics as it is economics. Our existing tax policies that privilege existing wealth over establishing new wealth, well, that's the choice. Financial behaviors and financial literacy, they're practically useless for households with little to no finances to manage in the first place. That's why we advocate for a birthright to capital. The bootstrap narrative framed in the politics of personal responsibility, which emphasize individual agency, particularly self-investments in education, as the pathway to upward mobility and efficient social distribution, that might literally be bad for black people's health. I'll tell you why. There are physical and psychological costs of stigma and ironically exerting individual agency in discriminatory and racially stigmatized environment, particularly for those individuals that pose a threat to the preferred position of a socially dominant group. Black men and women between the ages of 25 and 64 have about a 50% higher mortality rate than their white counterparts. But what's more disheartening is that these disparities increase with education. Black men and women with a college degree have nearly 70% higher mortality rates than similarly educated whites. Indeed, I wonder if our overemphasis on education to promote economic opportunity is a political ruse. In other words, is the rhetorical aspiration of equal opportunity largely a mechanism, a tactic, so to speak, to facilitate the hoarding of resources for the elite and upper middle class? Basically, I wonder if the framing of inequality as an opportunity gap serves the purpose of reinforcing the market norms that puts the onus on the individual while absorbing the state of responsibility for these structural impediments. In contrast, a race and gender-conscious economic Bill of Rights looks beyond individual factors to break down structural factors that preserve inequality by addressing intergenerational resource hoarding and other exclusionary practices. Having Americans out of work does immense damage to the human spirit, and it imposes extensive costs to individuals, families, communities, and society as a whole. Yet the political frame centers the problem of poverty and inequality and racial disparity as deficiencies internal to the poor and blacks themselves. Stigmatization based on race and anti-blackness, it provides the political fodder to implement harsh and punitive control of this underclass. Because of their marginalized social status and overrepresentation in poverty, blacks become the symbolism by which we define a surplus population characterized as persistently unemployed or unemployable, a source of urban crime and malice, and whose subsistence needs are deemed a drain on fiscal budgets. This fuels the rationale for austerity policy. If behavioral modification, particularly with regards to personal and human capital investment, is the central issue, why fund government agencies and programs which at best misallocate resources to irresponsible individuals and at worst creates further dependencies to fuel irresponsible behavior? Instead of that frame, we propose a federal job guarantee to be a direct source of employment and trigger a multiplier stimulus effect across our economy and enable all workers, particularly those at the low end of the labor market, to bargain for better wages, benefits, without the fear of being destitute from the threat of unemployment. It is not an employer of last resort program, but a viable alternative to undesirable low pay, low benefits, and poor working conditions. It would structurally change the U.S. economy away from low-wage work towards more moderate and high-wage work, a job sector in which the expanding global economy is making the U.S. less competitive anyway. To be clear, we're not talking about welfare to work or workfare, which impose work requirements as a mechanism to discipline the poor. Rather, we're talking about empowering workers with an authentic right to work for decent wages on a productive job to enhance our public's physical and human infrastructure. Basically, the plan would discipline bad employers, not discipline people. All right, so I'm about to conclude. I know I've been talking a long time. In addition, a federal job guarantee would mitigate the personal and familial costs of damaged mental health and other stressors faced by the unemployed. The unemployed themselves often say they would rather work they would rather be paid to work than receive unemployment compensation. Dignity is multifaceted. One's dignity is not limited to work, but everyone should have the right to work with dignity at least decent wages, benefits, and working conditions. Not only would a federal job guarantee restore the psychological balance to millions of unemployed individuals who desire to work but cannot, it would also address the long-standing, unjust, and discriminatory barriers that keep large segments of stigmatized populations out of the labor force and reverse the rising tide of inequality for all workers by strengthening their labor market and bargaining position and eliminating that threat of unemployment like I have as a tenured professor for everyone. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. So, thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton, once more. So, thank you for all your insight, for shedding a light on all of this important work, for giving us information that we can use, and for inspiring us to create solutions that are going to change things. It's that time to build those solutions. So, we've got 5 topic areas. As you know, each room that focused on a particular area will now have facilitated conversations where the goal is to really identify and get pen to paper and start to strategize and develop really tangible and actionable items that we can do to create very concrete outcomes that benefit those that we're trying to serve. If we get to work and we get that federal mandated jobs, right, then it's going to wed really well with what Al said earlier, where we're trying to work ourselves out of a job. Then with the federal program, we'll have a job. So it's going to be all good. So we've got, you've got about 5 minutes to go to the room. So in this room, I think you guys were talking about affordable housing, right? So then the strategy session on affordable housing will be here. The healthcare room, we'll have the healthcare session and so on and so forth. Facilitators and all of us who are participating, think about what does success really look like? right? What does success really look like in this issue area? And how do we build it? And as we're going through these conversations, I'd ask you to identify too, who are the stakeholders? Who are the people in power? Do they have high levels of power or low levels of power in this work? Who needs the buy-in? Who needs to be on board to be able to make this happen? How much is it going to cost? All of those things, just throw it out there. Let's get it down. We're going to be tracking all the notes, and we're going to be getting a report to all of you at the end of the summit, but we're also going to be taking these notes to influence decision makers and elected officials and influence policy recommendations. So let's leave it all on the table. Cool? We'll see you back here in an hour.
Miami Beach redevelopment area, and have done an amazing job at really crafting infrastructure projects that can drive the economy of Miami Beach and beyond, the convention center being one of them. And so these sorts of organizations, they take 40 years to make things happen, but slowly but surely they can. So we're really looking forward to hearing about all the recommendations you've got. Come on up.
Can everybody hear me okay? All right, fair warning, I'm a note taker on these, so I'm going to be looking at this. But ultimately, like the commissioner mentioned, we were talking about kind of the role of CRAs, which are community redevelopment agencies, and what their role is again in the community and how involved the community is with in their projects and in the development that they have. So some of the issues or current problems that we've noted as a community group is kind of the out of touchness that the community and the CRA has with each other. So the CRA is made up of a board that is mostly elected officials and municipal government officials, and they do all these really great projects, but the community feels like they're not being heard in terms of how are these projects benefiting the people that actually live here. A lot of the members do not live within the community. A lot of the community members do not feel like they've actually come and talked to them about some of the projects that they're doing. And and one great thing that we had a conversation with somebody that is a part of a CRA is that there is, the composition of the board, again, has a lot of these individuals have been on this board since, 2004, for over a decade. So you're getting the same type of thoughts and the same type of conversations, the same type of solutions without really involving the citizens and whom it's going to affect. So of the conversation we had, these are some of the solutions that we did come up with that. So one of them was, again, there is a community advisory board that is kind of associated with the CRA, but it's only advisory. It's very easy to hear advice and be like, all right, that's cool and stuff, but we're just not going to do it. So one of the solutions to that was to actually start the process of getting citizens to be members of these boards, not advisory members, but actually real live stakeholders that actually have a voice in the communications and decisions that are made within them. Another one was honestly just knowing how CRAs work. It's one thing to want change, but we need to understand in what capacity we're working in. So that was something that was really helpful in terms of understanding how CRAs work. Just because the community member may want a project, if it's not in the CRA plan, then it's against the law to do. So it's how do we change the plan for the CRA? So actually equipping ourselves with the knowledge necessary to kind of navigate that minefield in terms of policy and things, and also just coming together and organizing in an efficient way. So a lot of times CRAs are put in locations that are disenfranchised. So a lot of people that are disenfranchised, they work way more than 40 hours. They have a lot more concerns and a lot of other things taking up their time that they can't just go to a 2-hour meeting in the middle of the week or during a work day. So being creative with our population and how we communicate. So social media is a big thing. Create a group that everybody can be a part of. So though they may not be able to physically come to the meeting, their voice is still being heard and you can share information. For our friends that aren't that social media savvy, still have those physical meetings in place so that they can come and have their voice heard. And also organization, so organizing. So if everybody in this room had an opinion, even if that is the same opinion and everybody was saying it, what are you going to hear? Nothing. You're going to hear a whole bunch of noise kind of coming and colliding together. So definitely organizing under a single message so that we are the most efficient with the CRAs that we're trying to collaborate with, and also the most efficient with the community members that want to be heard. So those are our solutions for public and private partnerships.
Okay, thank you. We're going to turn to affordable housing next. Which is actually an important follow-through, right? Because if our redevelopment agencies and our CRAs don't put a people-first programming in place as they plan for the economic development of these areas, we can drive the cost of housing up rather than making it more available for people. You all know better than I know that we have an affordable housing crisis in the county. And it happens in every nook and cranny of the county. And we have some gentrification in some of the neighborhoods. District 5, Little Havana for me, is a very worrisome area, and many of the other county commissioners have that going on. So we're really looking forward to hearing what you have going on for affordable housing recommendations.
Thank you. Thank you again, and thank you all for being here. My name is Daniela Pierre. I'm with the Miami-Dade branch in NAACP. I was a co-facilitator for the Affordable Housing Strategy workshop, along with Santiago today. And we talked about numerous options on ways we can rebuild and sustain affordable housing here within South Florida. First up, we talked about preserving land by way of community land trust. And we also want to really look at redefining what affordable housing is and who it's being built for. That's very important as we're going to move forward to 2019 and onward. Also, we talked about stopping the sweep of the Sadowski Act, which is an act that's been funded and created since 1992 and has been perpetually swept by our state legislator. And next Friday, we will have our Dade delegation that will be meeting at Dade County Public Schools. And if you're available, please come out and support to speak on the behalf of having both sides of the House stopping the sweep of the Sadowski Act. We're blessed to have one of our former state reps, Roy Hardiman. He was one of the representatives that did support stopping the sweep. Definitely want to thank him for doing so with that. Also, we talked about establishing a community housing oversight board led by the residents. That board would ensure that we are bringing in developers and builders who are worthy of our stamp of approval and building housing that we need. We talked about zoning enhancements and protections that will preserve affordable housing. And we also talked about affordable marinas for veterans. So those are some strategies that we came away from our group, and we're looking forward to getting most of those things implemented to move housing forward. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to our job creation team. I often like to say part of the reason our housing is so unaffordable is we pay our residents so very little for the work that they do. So if we're working on wages and job creation, we're actually working on the price of housing as well. So really interested in looking and hearing what you all have to say. Does that work?
Hello?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Perfect.
So our conversation ended up being pretty heavy on the co-op side, but we did come up with some ideas on a name and shame, but maybe we'll call it name and challenge, and then also a name and award, businesses that are doing well or not as good as they can about wages and how they treat their workers. More focused and targeted government incentives to small businesses, especially legacy businesses. The promotion of higher wages in anchor industries, having a more aspirational attitude towards the way that we do development and programs, and something that is, it's a newly minted program called Acquisition Business Improvement Districts. We're gonna be asking you all to sign a non-disclosure agreement afterwards.
That was like a Dan Brown novel, like you get to the end of a chapter, you think you're going to go to bed, but you got to open the next page to find out what's going to be in the next chapter. So I guess you'll be putting that in your report and letting us know how we can help. Now, resiliency. Oh, we've got resiliency all lined up. This is something that's near and dear to sort of all of our hearts. And we're so grateful that we have the team from Houston here to provide their insights as well, since we share similar coastlines and similar issues.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Corrine Stewart, and I am a graduate of Clear Miami just this Thursday, which is a noted resolution to, creating more climate resilience advocates, which we need more of. We need more people to be educated in climate change and how to fight that. So some of our resolutions that we spoke about in our breakout sessions was more forward-thinking technologies, how to integrate that to make a greater impact, and fundamentally changing our agriculture system, changing it to a restorative system. And also, we also spoke about how resilience must start with the community, which, Catalyst, that's one of their notes on their agenda, to have community start the conversation and be the fighters of climate change. All right, and then also how to specifically hold those accountable that are in charge of some of these industries that are damaging and polluting our communities. Going back to nature, using agriculture and plants to rethink resilience. Educating at the local level. Leveraging strong networks to fight climate change. And being purposeful on who we are engaging. We need to know who the key players are to address. And then also strategically placing people in different communities to be educators. And then we also spoke about community-based social networks, how to use those type of groups to our advantage. Someone spoke about an app called Nextdoor, and then you also have other apps that we can use to pull or to present information to the communities to kind of advertise, when the groups are meeting, what's going on in their communities, what's happening, so they can be fully informed. All right, and also plugging into Miami-Dade Police and other government entities to assist in our efforts. And then using those same groups that I just spoke about to kind of tie the community in, because a lot of our communities are fragmented. They don't come out to greet their neighbors. They don't know who their neighbors are. But we need to band together to fight this enormous task that's ahead of us in regards to climate change. And also showing people the impact of trees, adding greenery, adding shade trees to a lot of our communities, tapping into the counties and cities' green programs. Someone spoke about that, we don't know what programs are out there because although Miami-Dade has had a program for many, many years that will give away free trees, a lot of people don't know about them. All right, and then also the Florida Extension Program where you can get rain barrels and native plants, and they can also assist you in picking the right type of plants to plant in your yard. And also someone spoke about denial in Miami about the severity of climate change. Needing people to think about adapting efforts that they're uncomfortable with, that they're not willing to change their mind. Also, FPL, the Miamians for Energy Freedom campaign that Catalyst is fronting, and then hubs to include in those efforts, and the Coalition of Equity and Resilience, which is a Houston program that we're hoping to get a model for, and lastly, getting more youth involved because this is the planet that we're leaving them with, so they should definitely be in the forefront of what we're doing. Thank you.
And now can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Now we're going to come to our last group, which is about healthcare access, and I'll just tell you a quick story from East Little Havana, where we did a health fair as part of our back to school initiatives. And we were lucky enough that the Colgate mobile dental clinic came. And we had several hundred, Maggie, right? Probably 300 kids, 350 kids that all had to go get a dental exam if they wanted to get a back to school backpack. And at the end of the day, the woman who was running the dental clinic said, this was the best event we've ever run. And I was thinking, oh, it's because we're so organized. We're doing such a good job. And I said, why? And she said, because 65% of the children we saw today have very dire problems with their teeth. Right? So her measure of success was our measure of healthcare failure. And so I represent a district that is very, very impoverished, and half of the residents of East Little Havana are non-citizens. And so access to health care now can be, particularly when it's free, can also be considered a dangerous path to take your family on, given the immigration connections now to accessing health care. So for me, I am extremely interested in hearing what you have to say, because it worries me every day, because I know that I'm seeing kids in the parks in Little Havana, and that they have not seen a doctor and they have not seen a dentist. So I'm hoping you can help us.
We'll try. I'm Holly Bullard from the Florida Policy Institute, and I was the note taker for the healthcare session. And really briefly, there was a lot of excitement about some of the strategies we heard in the morning from some groups around the nation that passed actually successful ballot initiatives in traditionally conservative states like Utah, Nebraska, and Idaho, and as well as Maine the year before, and saying, well, that's an interesting prospect, especially in the wake of an Amendment 4 success here, and just a lot of excitement. So that's when the group really kind of turns to thinking around strategy and mobilizing around a possible ballot initiative for Medicaid expansion in the state in 2020. And one of the key takeaways was actually, well, what's an important piece of that? And what are some takeaways from Amendment 4 and those other successful ballot initiatives across the state? Well, they're an issue-specific campaign. It's not partisan. And it's an issue, and it's really the story with the issue that is so compelling. And along with that, I said, well, where are our stories? I work for a policy institute, and I'm not the story nor the voice to be centered in this conversation. And that's why I wanted to bring Lori, she's bringing a couple other ideas, especially around topics of a story collection and centering those, especially those stories, in any kind of ballot initiative prospect. We also signed up because we're all very interested. So.
Well, thank you, Holly. My name is Lori Scott. I've been a participant in many of Catalyst programs. And today I participated in the healthcare group really to speak about how to elevate the patient and consumer voice on the issue of healthcare. I found that it's often been left out. I do have a healthcare story, and my story went from what it was like to be a young woman who ended up so ill that she was in a nursing home, only to fully recover and then dedicate and rededicate part of her life to the issue of healthcare advocacy. We really believed in the conversations in our group that the humanity and the human element of policymaking is sometimes left out of the healthcare discussion. And so one of the projects that I am now starting to work on is what it would be like to develop a podcast and have the patient voice out in the public in a way that it hasn't been previously. It's very difficult sometimes when people are ill to attend events or to speak to the press, to speak to policymakers, and to help people understand exactly what it is that their lives are like. But we really believe that storytelling is important, and bringing the patient voice is important to policymaking. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone. So as I said before, we'll be writing those up more formally in report format, and then we elected officials should be ready to receive the reports. I'd like to actually bring up now a great partner for the city of Miami, our wonderful mayor, Mayor Francis Suarez, and just tell you, one of the things I like most about the mayor is his willingness to openly talk about the fact that we do have two Miamis, where some of us live very well and some of us struggle much more than they should. And so when you've got a mayor that talks about those things, we're going to end up with a mayor who helps us work on that divide. So, Mayor Francis Suarez.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's really an honor, and it was wonderful to hear those presentations. I was actually shocked by two of the statistics that Commissioner Higgins cited. One, of course, was that 50% of her district was non-citizens. And that gives you a sense for how underrepresented we are in the city of Miami vis-a-vis the federal government and the resources that we deserve and need to deal with the issues that many of you in this room have dedicated your lives to dealing with. The second one, of course, I don't know how I can't tug at your heartstrings to hear the success of a dental mobile healthcare clinic where they are identifying the high percentage of children that have dental problems. And of course, it's the juxtaposition with, of course, someone who's trying to do something good. I did something similar as a commissioner with a mobile mammogram. And early detection for breast cancer is one of the leading indicators to success in fighting against breast cancer. So today I have the privilege of being able to introduce to all of you this very distinguished panel that we have here today. I think many of them don't really need an introduction. In fact, all of them don't really need an introduction because their work precedes them, and they've created a tremendous legacy already, many of them before becoming public officials. And so, of course, we have Commissioner Eileen Higgins, who's here from District 5, right? It's District 5. I always get the numbers confused. We only have 5 city commission districts. That's right. That's good. And obviously, it's pretty evident to everyone in this room, the compassion, the intelligence, the reflectiveness of someone who has just become a public official, and I look forward and I'm excited to work with her to foster city-county relationships. The next, yes. The next is Senator Annette Tadeo, and the senator and I had a wonderful experience in Colombia where we had an opportunity to go and see the inauguration of the Colombian president, and she does such a phenomenal job, not only in the state senate, but certainly representing this incredibly diverse community that we have. One of the things that I think we're all proud of, and even if you, as I scan the room, one of the things that is obviously extremely evident to me as the mayor of Miami is that we are diverse, and that is something that is a tremendous asset, and she embodies it, and she obviously has spent her time strengthening that diversity in our community. So thank you so much, Senator, for being here. The next person is, before he became newly elected as a state representative, one day calls me and I get this call and message from a name that I cannot pronounce. And Alupis is his last name, and all of a sudden, and it was, obviously I was referred by a few mutual friends and asked to sit down and have lunch with him. And you know, he's such a dynamic and young and energetic and intelligent person, and then that's all evident in the first 3 minutes that you talk to him. But the issue was early childhood education and the correlation between early childhood education and success later in life. Now, he is a Republican, as am I. And despite his party affiliation, he is someone who really believes that there is a need for investment and that all children in our society, in our city, in our community, in our county deserve to begin with as equal a head start as possible. And for most, I think, for me, certainly, I think I never realized how early education had to begin for it to really influence the outcomes later on in life. I mean, I was shocked to learn some of the statistics that he shared with me. And so he has made me a believer, and I look forward to working with him, Vance Alupis, state legislature. And last but not least, one of our own Miami residents, a brilliant and dynamic speaker, someone who is extremely measured. I've never heard a person speak an ill word about him. And if they do, they're gonna have a problem with me. Because there's nothing bad to say about him, so I think that's a better indication of the person who's saying it than it would be about him. He's someone that can reach across the aisle in a hyper-partisan world, and someone who can find solutions to problems and is known for that. So we have State Representative Nick Duran here with us as well. So now I'm going to have Francois. Okay, it's almost as bad as Fansa Lupus. No, I'm just kidding. Come up and moderate this panel. Thank you, friends. Thank you for the opportunity to say a few words.
No, I'm not on this channel. No, I don't have a state view.
She's not on the panel. So. The mayor actually stole my intro, so that means we can just go ahead and get right into it, right? So I am Francois. I'm the policy director here at Catalyst, and I'm very excited to see all of you, and thank you guys for being here on a Saturday. We are really excited to delve into not only the problems of Miami, but the solutions to the poverty that many of our communities face. And so with that, we'd like to start with the question of Medicaid expansion. As we know, a lot of states have pursued Medicaid expansion in recent months, yet Florida is one of the 9 states where child uninsured rate has actually gone up recently. So are there opportunities on the horizon to broaden the health coverage in this state and improve health care through poverty solutions? Any one of you can take that away.
I'll start since is this on? Green is on, right? Well, I'll start with the fact that I am obviously really disappointed that we have not expanded Medicaid. We have 800,000 Floridians that need this. And Nick is actually an expert in this field, so I want to go before him so I sound better. But I do want you to know that, obviously, I think healthcare is something that everyone deserves to have. It should not be something, because of your level of income. And in essence, Medicaid expansion is actually something we should be doing anyway, because we are in essence penalizing people because they work and they make just a little bit too much to qualify for Obamacare. We are the #1 area in the country with Obamacare signups. So clearly, we have a lot of people that have really benefited from having health insurance, and to have still 800,000 Floridians without it. So on the horizon, I proposed a bill last year, and I am proposing it, and I'm filing it again this year, which would make it a constitutional amendment to go on the ballot for us to be able to vote on it, because I don't expect our legislature to actually expand Medicaid. And obviously with the results of the governor's race, I think that has been answered. Now, I am not naive in thinking that this is something that's going to happen in the legislature, that we're even going to hear it in committee. However, I will give you some good news. President Galvano, the new president of the Senate, has really let it be known that he does want to discuss Medicaid, even if it's in the way of block grants. Now, there are issues with block grants as well in the states that have done this. And so that is something that we are now studying as to the possibility of maybe even having that discussion and getting that far. And there's been plenty of studies and states that have done it, and the negative effects of that, especially, for the people that need it the most. Having said that, I believe that, I know Nick and I are part of a group of coalition of not just elected leaders, but organizations that are just ready to move forward to get the signatures, to put it on the ballot so that we can get it done in Florida, because obviously, like we saw with Amendment 4, that's what it takes to get a lot of things done in Florida. So I am 100% committed to making sure that if the legislature, again, this session will not do it to allow us to vote, the voters, all the polls show the voters are with us. They want to expand it. It's crazy that we're leaving that much money out in the table, and it's our money anyway that we sent to Washington. So thank you.
So the senator actually did a really, really good job surmising a lot of what we were just talking about. So let me just sort of say, when we talk about Medicaid expansion, what we're saying is, when we're talking about Medicaid expansion, we're talking about access to health care, right? Access to quality, affordable health care. And why we believe that is critical in the state of Florida is because we know how important it is in ensuring a family's economic security, their ability to continue to move forward as opposed to move backwards because of bankruptcy, because of a bill, bankruptcy because of a medical issue. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when it comes to health care. And so that is what we're talking about. We're talking about a program that ensures Floridians have access to health care because we believe that provides a strong economic security tool for that family's future. And so I kind of live and die by the rule of spend 80% of your time listening and 20% of your time talking. And I'll sort of say it like this. This is what I have heard over the last couple of days. I've heard the President of the Senate and I've heard the Speaker both sort of say they would be interested in a Medicare block grant sort of system. What I heard is this, is that the Medicaid program should exist. First and foremost, fundamentally, a Medicaid program should exist in the state of Florida. For years on end, our Medicaid program has been very strict in the number of people and who can possibly be eligible for it. We're one of the strictest states in the country in terms of who can be eligible for Medicaid. You have to be darn poor. And if you are a parent if you're a single adult, even worse. It's even more difficult for you to even get close to it. So, you know, what we've seen over the last several years, and I've been actually studying this on the House side, I've been asked to kind of dive deeply into this issue as much as I can, is that there are different forms of how we get it done. One is, we've seen it, and I think she was talking about a ballot measure. The two is to legislatively create a ballot measure. The legislature can create ballot measures. And then the third is the legislature creates the form of the policy in place for Medicaid expansion. And what we've seen across the country are some states do a pure form. You see, like California has done a pure form of Medicaid. In the state of, in sort of Virginia, you see Arkansas, you see Kentucky, a few other states, Utah, I believe, and I was talking to a few colleagues about these issues. They have done it, but they've done it through a Medicaid waiver. And the Medicaid waiver allows, what you have to do is go to the federal government, the state of Florida. We legislatively say, okay, we would like you to go to Washington, D.C., go to Health and Human Services and ask them to create a waiver program that's a little bit different from what is the natural, normal program. And you're going to have to show us what that concept is. The guidelines of that are, it has to be less, can't cost more, can't increase the deficit. And third, it has to stay within the crux and the form of Medicaid. So you can't, Medicaid exists to give people healthy coverage. You cannot be undercutting that in that rule. So you have a few states who have done it in the last couple of years, in the last couple of months. And one of the states I've been studying is Virginia. Virginia has created a program where it is a waiver type format, but they've increased, and a few of these other ones have done it as well, and they're being litigated. But they've included a work requirement component to the Medicaid program. Now, here's what we know about work requirements to most extent. Over 60% of Medicaid recipients usually are already working. Like there's most of the folks who are going to be doing it. So why have working requirements? There's a level of personal accountability, right? When you think about it, we have Democrats, we have Republicans who are both thinking about this issue. So it's a matter of what are the components that bring both people to the table. And I think that you've seen in a couple of states, they've been able to pass it, Republicans, Democrats, whether it's a Republican-controlled legislature or a democratically controlled legislature or a governor, with a waiver-type format that has this work requirement format in place. And I think that's actually been brought to the table. How I think we pass Medicaid is we depoliticize it. Unfortunately, the politics behind Medicaid is what makes it so difficult and cantankerous. If you were able to depoliticize it and talk about the policy, the pragmatism behind the policy, the numbers, is there. And this is the second thing I've heard from both the Senate President and the Speaker of the House, is we need to save money. So my proposal, what I've seen, is that states have moved forward with a form of Medicaid expansion because they believe it will save them money. They have gone to the federal government with a waiver-type format and said, this is going to save you, it's going to save us less, we're going to increase the number of people who are going to have health care. So overarching, the opportunity is there. And there are different types of formats. We don't have to go full 100% format. I've, in the past, sponsored bills that have expanded it to small populations of people I proposed. So we've had an opioid epidemic over the last couple of years that we've been trying to deal with. So what we have seen is, why don't we deal with, and you're also seeing a lot of children having to deal with withdrawals. They're being born. So why not have the parents and the children ensuring that they have a form of Medicaid expansion so that they can continue on and ensure that they have some level of treatment in health care post-baby being born. So I think there is an opportunity, and I think it's going to come in some format. I've heard, and I believe the legislature from the leadership has been there. One, there's good things to be said. One, they believe Medicaid programs should exist. Two, they want to save money. Good starting point conversations in my business. So that's kind of how I see it.
Thank you very much. Miami is one of the least.
Can I just say one quick thing? So Nick listens 80% and talks 20. As a newly elected, I listen 98 and I talk 2%. I just want to say, first of all, Gretchen, congratulations. There's a lot that people want to get discouraged about in America today. And to show up on a Saturday when it is absolutely beautiful outside and to see so many people sitting here talking about how we move Miami forward. And Commissioner, you and Mayor Suarez talked about 2 Miamis. There are absolutely 2 Miamis, and there are probably 50 Miamis. And one of the things that has frustrated me so much about our community is that our leadership has been so siloed. We care about our community, our neighborhood. It's the people of Miami Beach not caring about what's happening in Homestead, or the people of Aventura not worrying about what's happening in Palmetto Bay. For Miami to move forward, for all Miamians, we need to treat ourselves like all Miamians, and that's what I love about what you've done, Mayor Suarez. These 2 individuals see their leadership through that lens. I'm an idealistic at heart. I've fought for the last 10 years, for 5 of them alongside this great man, on behalf of children and families across the state. I fundamentally believe to my core that all individuals elected to the legislature, all individuals in general, and there are probably some outliers, believe that we need to solve this problem. And that is an important starting point. If we had different goals, then I think there would be issues. But I think the question that we have to answer now is, if we have the same goals, what is the process that gets us there? And Nick mentioned a couple important points, which are identifying individual populations. Nick and I worked for 5 years on making sure that every child in Florida had access to a pediatrician. When we first got started in 2010, 800,000 children in Florida didn't have health insurance. I think that's unconscionable in a country as rich and generous as ours. As of last year, we had about 270,000, so we had made enormous progress. But the fact that 250,000 children still do not have access to health care, still may be using the emergency room as their primary care, is not the community that I want to raise my daughters in. So one of the things we just see, and France, you mentioned this, we saw an increase of 37,000 children. That could fill Marlins Park. Think about that. 37,000 children this past year are no longer insured here in Florida. We need to fix Florida's kid care system. And one of the things, I'm not trying to steal thunder, but one of the things I was so excited to get elected upon to work with Nick is trying to streamline Florida's kid care program. Because currently you have 4 different programs that children and families can easily fall in and out. It's nice because it's bipartisan, but we need to make sure that every child in Florida has access to a pediatrician. And to see the number of uninsured increase every year is not something that any of us should accept.
Thank you. I think we at Catalyst completely agree with you, Representative Alupis, that we need to approach Miami as one Miami. And one of the issues that we know that across the board Miami is struggling with is affordable housing. So I think it'd be no surprise to you that that was an issue that this group tackled over the course of this day. And we would like to hear from you guys, what are the solutions to affordable housing? Who are the players that need to be at the table? And how can we prevent this rise in gentrification we see throughout some of the communities in our cities?
Okay, sounds like a city question. Exactly. So, I'll say some things that are not rocket science, and then I'll try to say some things that hopefully are closer to rocket science. The not rocket science is that oftentimes affordable housing comes down to 2 critical ingredients: money and land, not rocket science. And so obviously we have $100 million in the city of Miami from our Miami Forever bond that we're going to be activating over the course of the next few years. We have hopefully a couple of $100 million, if not $300 million, that we may be activating if we extend the Overtown CRA, and probably another $100 million if we extend the Omni CRA. So we're talking about a combined total of $500 million that we can be spending over the course of the next 10, 15 years. That's a significant amount of resources. The second part, of course, is land. And, we have the county commissioner here. One of the one of the biggest opportunities that we have if we can work together is work as a city and a county. The county has a lot of what I would consider underzoned land. In other words, they have projects where they were built many, many years ago. They were built as garden style, and they're very, they're very ample and generous plots of land. And if we could densify those with the resources that we have, and sort of they can be a land partner and we can be a funding partner, we can make a significant dent in, or not significant dent, but we can make a dent in the affordable housing crisis, extremely low income crisis. I think the other part is we've got to teach our policymakers, and this is why as Van said, it's so exciting to see everybody here on a Saturday, where everybody could be somewhere else in beautiful Miami. We've got to demystify the process for our policymakers. They have to understand the economics, because the sort of rocket science part about it is what I call affordable housing by entitlement. And we did that. I did that as a commissioner when I created a piece of an amendment to Miami 21, which created an entitlement process that allowed people who were applying for tax credit deals at the state to score better. And so we reverse engineered the scoring system. We created an entitlement process that fit that scoring system, and we got 1,000 units in 1 year. We busted the bank. So you have to think creatively as well. And so, and I got to say this, and this is probably a little bit unpopular to say, there is a finite balance, and there is a delicate balance, I guess is a better way of saying it, between the different levels of affordable housing and the resources that you have, and then of course being in a market where some people don't want to build affordable housing, they want to build market-driven product. And so when you're trying to sustain growth in a city, which feeds so many other sectors, construction, the city itself, because we feed off of growth as well in terms of paying our firefighters, our police officers, our general sanitation workers, et cetera. So those are all very, very finely tuned financial models. And I think we all have to do a better job, and the community is continuing to do a better job of educating itself so that we can make better policies.
So I'll just be very brief on what I think. Not that there's not a lot we can do, but I think at a state level, first thing that we are constitutionally mandated to do when we go to Tallahassee is pass a budget, right? And our budget, close to $90 billion last year. And it's a budget, when you look at it, it's built on priorities. And to a certain extent, and I think, the mayor and I had a good conversation a couple days back, and we were talking about how important it is for us to recognize that we have to look at the Sandusky Housing Trust Fund, a fund that has been built, Sandusky, excuse me. We have to look at it and look at what we've done in the past and what can we do in the future. And the reality of it is we keep rating it for other things. We down here in Miami-Dade know how incredibly important it is, how affordable housing it is in a crisis of the magnitude of the crisis here in Miami-Dade compared to other places in the state of Florida, I'd argue, is probably much higher. So it's incumbent on us as the legislature, as the delegation, to really push hard to ensure that we stop rating it and put it towards the work that it's been created to do.
Yeah, we've created this great ability. Honestly, I think we've created this great ability to have the taxpayers vote, and it's their money to vote on, for a fund with very clear intentions, and to use those dollars for other intentions. So what I think Nick is exactly right. I serve on the Miami Homes for All board, which is formerly the Miami Coalition for the Homeless. We need to make sure that they're not rating Sadowski to fill budget holes. Secondly, I think the fact of the matter is, and I know the commissioner knows this intimately, is these challenges are exacerbated by the fact we don't have a comprehensive mass transit system. So a lot of the impact is happening to the folks who are working in the service industry who cannot live anywhere near the urban core. They're living as far south as possible, and then they're spending 2 hours coming into their work every single day. So these are quality of life issues that need to be addressed by the legislature, by local government, and again, people are hurting.
Well, I'm just going to add, I'm just going to add that, there is a bipartisan bill in the House and the Senate, and it sounds like we may just get our newest representative to join in, to actually make it a law to not allow the rating of the Sadowski Fund. And I'm a co-sponsor of this bill. So that's the good news. The bad news, here's the bad news. The bad news is it wasn't even heard in committee, wasn't even agended for committee, both in the Senate and in the House. Why? Because we have gotten way too used to rating it to balance the budget. And we need to stop doing that. And it really does not need to be a partisan issue. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. It is a bipartisan bill because a lot of people, especially in the bigger communities, understand the importance of this. And the way that we sell it to the people in the rural communities is about the economics. Many of them actually live off the bigger counties and the money that we give, we send up to Tallahassee. It is going to be a huge problem if we're not functioning. So at the end of the day, it really is better off. They're going to be better off making sure that places like South Florida, Central Florida don't have these affordable housing issues. All I can tell you is we just need to do a better job of, just like the Medicaid expansion, not politicizing it. It's the economics of it. It really is about our economy in our state. If we don't have a place for our teachers to live, our firefighters, and, we keep having to pay for that, fact that they can't afford to live here, it's either way it's going to come out of our pocket. So let's make sure that those funds that were already allocated, supposedly, that we use them for that, and we'll be able to then have all the ideas that you guys just came up with to resolve this issue. I don't think it'll be resolved. And as far as the transportation, I love that you brought that up because it is part of the problem as well, that it is just we don't have a holistic way of looking at our entire county and thinking of how we all get from one place to another and how people get to work. I represent one of the furthest west areas, and the most congested traffic-wise areas, which is Kendall, and also South Dade, Richmond Heights, and Perrine. And these people trying to get to where the jobs are in downtown is causing a lot of the problems with our traffic and infrastructure. So I'm excited to tell you this, to end with this. I am now on the TED committee, so Transportation and Economic Development, committee for appropriations. So a lot of the funding for these kinds of projects will come through this committee. I specifically asked to get on it because obviously our community needs to have a voice in TED appropriations. And in addition to that, we now have a new committee in the Senate that actually is going to deal with infrastructure and security. So again, all of this goes to play to what we're trying to accomplish at the state level. But until we stop rating the Affordable Housing Trust, the Sadowski Fund, we're not going to resolve this issue.
If I could summarize our priorities, just for listening to this conversation, I think we could say it's healthcare, transit, housing, but let's not forget jobs. Like, real jobs that pay middle, higher income are very important to creating a society that is upwardly mobile and economically sufficient. Do you guys have any ideas, policy-wise, of how we can bring higher paying jobs to the Miami area?
I think the city of Miami is undergoing a very dramatic change, and you're seeing a vibrant, growing tech ecosystem that is taking hold in the city. And that's one that I think we have to make sure does not exacerbate the divide between rich and poor in the city, but is connected. I can tell you, and I think I can say this now, even though now that the process of Amazon is over, when they came to see us, they were very concerned about the reputation that the tech community has gotten nationally about creating or exacerbating the wealth, the income inequality issue. And so they really, really wanted to do something about it. And I think it starts with education. I think it starts with obviously making sure that children in every single one of our neighborhoods thinks that that is a path to success. as opposed to other things that they can be doing. And then, of course, you have to allow that ecosystem to develop. We're number one in the nation in startups right now, according to the Kauffman Foundation. We're investing, in the city, I'm investing money in 2 major scale-up organizations, Endeavor and 500 Startups. And of course, I think, the fact that we were in the running for Amazon and we were, one of 20 cities out of 240 that applied, I think it gives us hope that we can attract what I call tech anchor tenants to come to Miami. But again, the trick will be making sure that prosperity and those jobs are able to be filled by everyone in our city, not just some.
Okay, exactly. I'll be brief. I also want us to think about workforce, not just of today, but the workforce of 2030. So I'm going to give my necessary plug for early childhood education. The children who started in pre-K, when VPK was first passed, and it was really the leadership of this community, if you don't forget. We have some titans of children in the House today. Holly Swirling from the Fatherhood Task Force of South Florida, Charles Oslander, the former CEO of the Children's Trust. So much has come out of Miami that I hope you understand what the ripple effect has meant to this entire state. But the children who were in the first cohort of pre-K are graduating from high school this year. So they are becoming part of that workforce. And the reality in Miami-Dade County and in Florida is that we are sending about a third of all of our children into public education not ready to be there. And statistically, and if you want to talk to me afterwards, I will chew your ear off. The reality is our approach to public education, our approach to education in general cannot be focused on remediation. We cannot spend all of our time trying to catch children up. And it is our responsibility, if I don't want this to be called a poverty summit, this should be a prosperity summit. And the reality is that prosperity should not be limited to certain communities. And that begins with making sure, to the mayor's point, that every child has that foundation that we would want for our own children, our own grandchildren, our own brothers and sisters. And that begins with a solid foundation in health access, in parent support, and in early childhood education. And that is as much about the workforce of this community as Amazon coming to Miami. I promise you.
No, my 2 cents is absolutely education. Everything starts and ends with education, and we unfortunately have not been funding education fully, so that's also part of our frustration. And I'm still waiting on a cost differential study that we paid for in the last budget, and I just asked for it, and they told me I should have it January 1st. That's a holiday, so I don't know how I'm going to do that. But nonetheless, supposedly we're supposed to have that. So this is really important to us. And, I don't know how anybody can think that it doesn't cost more to live here than it does in the rural areas, but somehow there are those people in Tallahassee who think that we should all get the same when it is not the same. So that is one issue that deals with education. But I want to bring up another issue, which is I think actually climate change creates a tremendous opportunity for us for job creation. We are ground zero of what is going to happen, and it's going to happen. It is happening. So yes, it's costly, but it's a great opportunity for us to create the jobs of the future that other areas will then emulate what we do, or what we don't do right, they learn from as well. So I think that there are opportunities, just as there are caveats, because we have so many politicians that still don't believe that this is really happening. The point is, I think it's a great opportunity for job creation, and I know that the city of Miami has been a leader in this, and the residents, have ponied up to be a leader in this as well. But I believe that that's one area where there can be a tremendous amount of job creation. So technology, but let's not forget about science.
Everyone's hitting the nail on the head today. Just 2 things on climate change. I live my district 112 has coast. I even have an island that I represent, Key Biscayne. So, when Irma came and you saw the water inundate Brickell Avenue the way it did and leave, that was the first time in my life, or my first time, I think many folks have ever seen something like that. but it creates an opportunity. Like she said, we have to reconcile with the fact that it's coming.
And the last time.
Yeah, good. But I met with Associated Builders and Contractors, so our builders and contractors, and if you would be blown away by the reality that most of their workforce they're having a tough time filling their workforce, right? The people who are building the infrastructure that will maintain us in the future going forward. So there is an awesome opportunity there for trade schools, and to work in those sorts of areas as well. And then finally, I'll leave it because I think everything's interconnected. In healthcare, if you did expand Medicaid or you did ensure that more people have health coverage and are going to a doctor, and the economies that surround the folks who are delivering healthcare, it is already shown how strong the opportunity is there as well.
Thank you, everyone. I think everyone here is wondering what the most effective way for activists, nonprofits, small business owners, and community members to communicate their needs to policymakers like you guys. So could you guys expand on that a little bit? How do people get in touch with you? How does the community push for change?
So what I've found in my career is that elected officials are usually pretty accessible, at least the ones that I communicate with. I think it's really about understanding the way our processes work, right? So first of all, we have a fiscal year. Our fiscal year begins October 1st and it ends September 30th. We start making decisions on funding either after we get an allocation of money that begins on October 1st or in anticipation of a budget that will be passed in September. So there are specific times of the year where I think it's important to be in front of a policymaker when you have an idea. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is, I get pitched all the time. I think everybody here gets pitched all the time. And so the first thing is, is your idea one that is another organization is already doing that we're funding? So that's a first threshold question. Second question is there a track record? I mean, is there a deliverable, something that I can hang on to as a policymaker that I can say, hey, I'm going to invest X number of dollars, but historically, for every dollar that I invest, I get a return of whatever. And I think that's important because we're under scrutiny in terms of our decisions, and I think it's important that we can justify to the public that we are good stewards of the tax money that they invest with us. Obviously, having a track record is important. I think when you meet with elected officials, understand that their time is limited. They're running an $80+ billion budget, and so you have to come prepared. I think that would be my last piece of advice. Come prepared. Don't come and say and think, well, I'll just have a follow-up meeting where I'll bring everything. No, bring everything and leave everything, and make sure that when you schedule things with an elected official, that's the last piece of advice, is that you tell their office or you ask their office who else needs to be in the meeting. Because let me tell you, oftentimes I'll have a meeting and I realize that the right people are not in the meeting, which means what? You need to have another meeting, right? And so, and that takes more time. That's more time for you. That's more time for them. You may not get to see them for another couple of months. So those would be my pieces of advice for you.
I think the mayor has set the standard for responsiveness of an elected official, and I mean that seriously. You can text him, you can email him, you can Instagram him, you can tweet him. I'm getting better at Twitter, but it's a standard that we all need to hold ourselves to. From the vantage point, I'm an advocate at heart. I mean, that is who I am. That's what I have done for the last decade. I would say to your question, France, about being effective, you need to find unusual partners. You need to go into every meeting with people that may not be immediately sort of either understanding of your issue or obviously entwined with your issue. So for us on early childhood education, it was very important for us to get the Florida Chamber of Commerce, the largest business entity in the state, to understand the implications of this work as it related to the workforce of 2030. And I can just tell you, when I walked into a room, like when I went to see Mayor Suarez, he knew what I was coming to talk about. I wasn't coming to talk about Museum Park. I wasn't coming to talk about mass transit. I was coming to talk about early childhood education. When the head of the Florida Chamber of Commerce comes to talk about early childhood education, it's a totally different conversation. So just from a strategic standpoint, as you're having those conversations, think about other partners that you can bring to the table that may offer a different voice.
So, and I think that's right, the gold standard as the mayor in terms of his responsiveness. And I used to work with Vance, and our boss was Dave Lawrence. Many of you probably know who Dave Lawrence is. You probably send him an email, and the guy responds within like 5 minutes of you receiving that email.
Responded before you sent the email. I know what you were thinking.
So for us, we have like the internal infrastructure. He has nailed it into me that we need to be as responsive as we can. So we don't operate in the clouds. We don't have these gates that keep us out from you. The office that I occupy is your office. You have elected me to represent you, and I have the honor of sitting in that desk and representing you. So first and foremost, we have an office in the district that you can go and come to any time of the day. You can call my team. I have a district secretary who works there every day and is there to intake and work with you on all sorts of issues. We have worked with issues as interesting as somebody calling and saying that they have a rooster in their backyard that's crowing too loud at 5 in the morning. Can you do something about it? And so we serve as air traffic control for some of the most unique issues I've ever experienced. But we are there, and we're supposed to be there. The other is organizations like Catalyst who bring us together, who work to coordinate and collaborate and bring folks together. There's a lot of power in that. There's a lot of people who operate in silos. And I've been working in the nonprofit world with Vance close to 10 years as well. And what we've seen is a lot of people operating, doing a lot of the same type of energy, a lot of the same type of issues, working on their own, but not talking to each other. So first and foremost, I think it's always, are we talking to each other and then engaging? Because we will find a good strategy, a common strategy that will help us move forward. And so I think that's a critical piece to this as well. And I think we just heard that as well, that it's always about what are we doing, what do we look like holistically, who do we have with us, who do we not, and then let's engage.
Well, I love it that I'm up here with some very responsive folks. I don't come from the nonprofit world. I actually come from the small business world and the chamber world. Most people don't know this, but I actually was the chair of the Coalition of Chambers of Miami-Dade County, 22 chambers combined. I was on the Beacon Council, all the groups that, are usually not associated with Democrats, I might add. But, I think one of the reasons you'll hear me talk a lot and always try to think of the economic aspect of everything that we're trying to do that is good for the community is because of that. I'm always trying to figure out how in the world are we going to be able to sell it to those who may not be as warm-hearted as some of us are about some of these issues that break our heart, but more of, always try to think of how are we going to sell it to the different sides. If you have an idea, we're always welcome to those ideas. I don't know if you guys know this, but my cell phone is on my business card. And I am extremely accessible, not just to my constituents, but just to everyone as a whole, and try to be responsive as well. However, our time is very limited, so if you come in, just definitely have your ideas together. Think of all the negatives and the people that will be against it, and how can you also meet with them to talk about it, because that's what I do when it comes to my bills. Who's going to be against this? Let's talk to them. Let's bring it to them before we even file it to try to see if we can avoid the problems before you even start, raising flags everywhere because you're trying to bring about some change. And the other thing I do want to say, how many of you have sent those emails where you just, an organization tells you send this email and you just send them? I just wanted to let you know that, unless it's personalized and you really write it, we know that we're getting 100 of them that look exactly the same. They're not as successful or successful at all because we're just reading the same email over and over again. I really, again, the most successful emails are the ones where it's a constituent, they actually live in your district, and where you're specifically telling me why you're sending me this email. Obviously, the phone calls and the personal going by the office is the most effective. But again, the time is so limited. If you go, please come prepared. Be prepared for 15 minutes max. Cut the small talk. There is no time for that. Please, I'm telling you, I'm just telling you, and if you come to Tallahassee, it's even worse, probably 5 minutes. So just be prepared. If they won't give you the time, try to ask if you can get some time walking to committee, because sometimes the schedule gets so full. So just get their time and you say, I'll go with you on the elevator, I'll walk with you as you're walking to your committee meeting. You can get the time of your legislator, but just make sure that you work around the system so you can do it. I certainly welcome it. But please understand, and you know the funny part most people don't know, our job is supposed to be a part-time job.
Well, I want to take this time to thank you guys for all the wonderful ideas, comments, and the innovation that you've brought to this conversation. So could we just give a round of applause for Representative Duran, Senator Cedillo, Representative Alupis, and Mayor Suarez. Yeah, thank you. We'd also like to thank all of you once again for attending the summit and bringing all these ideas and initiatives to this space today. We are very inspired by your passion and your commitment to making Miami thrive. Everything that's been discussed today will be on our website, and we'll also send you guys a link if you've signed up. So thank you for everyone for being here, and thank you to the Catalyst team for putting this together and all the wonderful work that you've done today. Boom, 2 minutes.